Welcome
All
to the
right.
25th episode of The Smartest People in the Room. If you've been following this series, you understand what we're doing here. We shine a light on incredibly smart, accomplished people and help them share stories from their careers and lives, as well as anecdotes about their past, present, and future. Today, I am thrilled to present two amazing music industry veterans with diversified experiences in many areas of the business, including major label world, radio, and most recently, podcasting. Before we get started, let me take care of a little bit of business. First, to our audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people like our guests and the amazing work that they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a little bit more nuanced. Some of you may know that I am a music industry headhunter. By definition and function, I help people connect with companies. So in this series, my goal is to help you make such connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. Also, I want to thank our sponsors. Without their support, we couldn't do what we do. I want to thank First Horizon Bank, Bufkin Baker, which is the search firm that I work with, Four Roses Bourbon, the Fairlane Hotel, Core Power Yoga, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Lightning 100, Tennessee Brew Works, Moo TV, Jive Printing, Project Music, and also Organics. So let's get the program started. Today's interviewer is Mike Etchart. Mike has been involved in the recorded music industry for over 25 years with stops at SST Records, Warner Music Labels, EMI, and the Universal Music Group. Along the way, he has worked in artist development, catalog marketing, advanced technologies, consumer electronics, and as an interactive games producer. He also hosted the nationally syndicated radio programs Sound and Vision Radio for Sound and Vision magazine, and Pop Tech Radio for 14 years. He produces public radio segments and specials for PRI and is currently co-hosting Your Morning Coffee podcast with his pal, Jay Gilbert. He's also a gigging musician, pre-COVID that is. He's trying to get better as a recording engineer and a third-generation organic farmer growing citrus and avocados in Southern California. Talk about the Renaissance man. And joining Mike today as our featured guest is Jay Gilbert. As a teenager in the Pacific Northwest, Jay smuggled his Canon F1 into rock concerts to get the perfect shot of the likes of Queen, Van Halen, Elton John, and Cheap Trick. After college, he toured as a musician, gaining invaluable experience in what it takes to create and promote an album. He later translated that knowledge as an executive with Universal Music, Sony Music, and Warner Music Groups. Jay moved to San Francisco and finally to LA for Universal, where he worked for 18 years, most recently as VP of New Media and Online Marketing for Universal Music Enterprises. Jay's been on the cutting edge of digital sales and marketing with Universal Music, Fox Home Entertainment, Starbucks Entertainment, and Warner Music Group. It is this unique perspective as a musician, music executive, and fan that makes his approach to digital strategy and online marketing so artist-friendly. Currently, Jay is co-founder of digital strategy and analytics at Label Logic. He also is a curator of Your Morning Coffee, which is a weekly music news for the New Music Business podcast, co-host of Your Morning Coffee podcast with Mike, and also co-host of Music Business Weekly podcast with a different Mike named Mike Brandvold. Folks, please welcome Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart as today's guests on The Smartest People in the Room. Take it away, guys.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Thanks,
wow.
Tom.
Quite the intro, man. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out. I just saw in the chat there, we've got one of my favorite singer-songwriters of all time, Parthenon Huxley. P. Hux, good to see you, brother.
Too. Very impressive.
One of my mentors and friends, Gigi Johnson from UCLA. Good to see you, Gigi. Jim Griffin's in the house.
Indeed.
Michael, I'll turn it over to you, brother.
Well, thank you, Jay. I feel honored to be doing this. We do get together periodically and do a version of this at
Yes,
a
we
burger
do.
place. And so we now
Hmm.
get to do it in front of lots of people.
Always a pleasure.
I think it's probably important to talk about what label logic is and what you do and how that came to be. And then, talk about some of the challenges these days for artists and managers that you are constantly helping them with.
Yeah, well, thank you. Label Logic is a label and artist services company that Jeff Moscow and I started about 6 years ago. We had worked in the major label ecosystem our entire career. We both worked at Universal for about 20 years. I left as vice president of what they called new media. Remember that term, Michael?
Oh yeah, I love that term.
And Jeff was VP of marketing. And about 6 years ago, over coffee, which is what we tend to do, we decided to start our own company. We wanted to work with non-toxic people. We wanted to help artists, managers, labels, distribution companies. We wanted to use our knowledge base because we're old guys. We've been around a while, but we also follow technology really closely and we follow data really closely. So we felt like we could help some of these artists. So we started that about 6 years ago, and we work with some of the biggest artists, on the planet, some of the biggest managers, all the way down to some developing artists that you've never heard of, because they all need help. So that's kind of what Label Logic is. And there's also kind of a part of that, which is education. I work with, Gigi Johnson and some of her classes at UCLA. I work at, with some of the classes at USC and so on. And there's that part, but then I'm on the Music Biz Weekly podcast with Mike Brandvold, as Tom mentioned, and that's really about DIY artists. So, what's an ISRC code? What's a Harry Fox license? What's the Music Modernization Act? To kind of help bring folks up to speed, because there's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of different platforms, it's evolving and changing. And before we kicked off, we were joking that it's changed while we've been on this call, and it has. So there's that education part of it, right? And then your morning coffee started off, to about 100, 150 people out of my Rolodex. And it's just a curated look every week at the music business. Well, after 5-6 years, now it's over 12,000 people. And I'm super proud to say some of the biggest artists and managers in the business. And it's great, when you get an email from one of these people and they say, what do you think about this? It's very rewarding. And then, of course, the last thing I'll say is that you and I just kind of took that idea for your morning coffee, the weekly music news, and decided we would take maybe 4 or 5 of those key stories and dig a little deeper. Nobody really has a lot of time to read. That's why your morning coffee is a blurb with a link to the full story, right?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with what we do with your morning coffee, the podcast, is that when you're, working out, going for a walk, whatever you're doing, you can listen to and let us kind of dig in deep. What do these stories mean? What's the backstory? What's the narrative? What should you take out of it? Because there are a lot of stories that are copies of what somebody else said. And then there's a handful of these stories that we try to dig into, which are from the source, written by Glenn Peoples from Billboard, Sherry Hu, Amber Horsburgh, some of these folks, Keith Jopling, these guys who actually do the research and dig into analysis and interview people. Those are some of the things that we're trying to dig into.
Well, it's such a great resource. And I will say, as I was thinking about, I met you in 1999. We were 8, and even then you had a voracious appetite for knowledge and for data, and it's lovely that you have kind of put that and help. And I would go to you for things, just on a one-on-one situation. And so now it's nice that you've done the wonderful newsletter.
Thanks.
And it is such a great resource. And for those of us that nobody has the time, and it's so nice for you to kind of pre-populate it with stuff that we need to know. But let's talk about, as you sit down with managers and artists these days, what is the typical problems or typical solutions that they want you to help them with?
That's a great question, because the first thing I ask a client is, what's keeping you up at night? What are your needs? What are your goals? What's the narrative? Because they're different for every artist. This job would be so easy if you just had a cookie cutter approach and said, here's my template of a marketing plan, and we grew up in an era that was sort of templatized. If you had good music and you had a good label and you had a good radio promotion team and you went out on the road and put butts in the seats, over time, your label would give you 2, 3, 4 albums to develop.
Sure.
Well, it's not like that anymore. So everything is different. Every single marketing plan we put together is different. But to your question, there are different levels. So I'll get a manager that'll come to me and say, look, what's the silver bullet? How do I get on these key playlists? And then, as you know, my mantra is a playlist is not a marketing plan. So then you have really established artists that really want to reignite their base. They really want to look at like competitive audiences, right? So everybody has a little bit different need, but I think what it falls back to is looking at the data. There's so much great information that you can get these days. A lot of your socials have insights for free. You can go in there and see what posts are underperforming, what's overperforming, how does my audience look to other audiences. And you and I talk about this all the time. You can't just rely on one source, because every artist or manager that comes to me will tell me who their audience is. And they're usually about 80% correct, because there's 3 audiences, right? There's the audience for commerce, sales, streams, and downloads. That's an audience. There's an audience for socials, right? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And then there's the audience of when you're standing on that stage and you look out into the audience, who's there, right? And so you have these 3 audiences, and rarely do they fully align. So you kind of look at what the audiences are. You look at ways that you can reach fans that don't know about you yet. There's an old adage in the music industry, there's only 2 reasons why people aren't buying your new music. Either they've never been exposed to you, or they've been exposed to you and they don't know you have new music out, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's something that you can affect with a whole arsenal of tactics. And the last thing I'll say is that with the data that we have now for Spotify for artists, Apple Music for artists, Amazon Music for artists, all these different platforms, Chartmetric, Viberate, Sound Charts, there's so many sources for this data. You really need to think about, how can we make this actionable? What can we do with this data? It's nice to have data and impress your friends, with your followers, your likes, and those kinds of things. But are you getting true engagement? And how do you reach that next kind of rung on that target? You've hit the center with your hardcores. How do you kind of grow it out? And that's the exciting part of what Label Logic does, is really trying to find that next ring of that target and then execute on it. And that's highly rewarding.
Jim Griffin, always insightful, has a thing in the chat, says, we once marketed and promoted tangible record albums. Then we sold downloads. No more. Do we now sell experiences? How has this fundamental change played out?
That is such a great question, because of the fact that one of the things that I think Label Logic is ahead of some other competitors with is experiences. And it may not be what you meant, Jim, but with experiences, you remember back when Pledge Music was rocking, there were some experiences in there. Some of them might have been as simple as getting a handwritten lyric sheet or getting a signed road case or whatever. But it wasn't just your standard CD, socks, pennant, poster, that sort of thing. So what my partner Jeff and I noticed right away is we did this campaign with a pretty big heritage artist, and we noticed that the experiences were off the chart. So we're working with, for example, 3 of the 4 members of Jellyfish are in a band called the Licorice Quartet.
As Emily Kagan has pointed out in the chat, yes, one of my all-time favorite bands. Yes,
Emily Kagan, and it's Licker, that licorice, not the candy. But if you go to their website and you go to their store, you're going to see experiences like, we'll co-write a song with you. We'll put the bass track on your track. We'll write a song for you. They'll take kind of that Cameo model of, if you haven't been to cameo.com, you have to check that out. But they take that to a whole nother level, which is you can go to Cameo, which I did recently, and had the Soup Nazi do a video message for my dad
I saw that.
for his birthday, right? No soup for you, 1 year. And, but you can do that as an artist.
Yeah.
There've been a lot of articles lately about, you can do a piano lesson, with Roger Joseph Manning Jr. You can do, so experiencers, I think they're kind of that next thing. For a while, paid meet and greets in a non-COVID world were really cutting edge and really cool. And, Mike Brandvold, who does one of the podcasts with me, he was one of the innovators in that field with Doc McGee, a longtime client and friend, and the band Kiss. And what surprised them was not only the level that people would pay for that, but that they came back every year, every single tour.
Right.
And they did it over and over, and they'd bring the picture they had taken the time before. So I think as artists, musicians, singer-songwriters, managers, stop thinking so much about that release cycle. Yeah, the release cycle is still important. That's what you do.
Way different.
It is. And it's the music business, right?
Yes.
So I just know that as a fan, when I was growing up, if you said, hey, you know what, you can get a paid meet and greet, or you can have, Freddie Mercury sing backup on your song, I would have sold my car.
Robbed a bank. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and one of the things that we, again, talk about it, Parthenon Huxley is on the call, certainly a wonderful artist. I think about it from the artist perspective at the moment, and it scares the crap out of me because we live in a fantastic time. If you're an artist, when we were growing up playing music, you have to pay $100 an hour and $1980 to go to a recording studio. There's all these things that made it so hard to release music. Now the tools are there. A lot of the gates have been crashed, but yet there's so much for artists you have to be a recording engineer. You have to be a marketing exec. You have to be a social media. You have to do all of these things. And oh, by the way, when you have a minute, write a great song. So when you're talking to artists like that, how do you kind of clear the deck and say, focus on what are some of the things that let's say some of the DIY artists should focus on?
Well, there's so much to unpack there, because you're absolutely right. These days, in order to succeed, you have to cover all of those different things, but it all comes down to the song. It's a meritocracy, always has been, always will be. It doesn't matter how great you are on socials or all of that stuff. Maybe if you have a killer live show, there have been people who could squeak by and move forward that way. But the bottom line is the focus should be on perfecting your craft, writing great music. One of the things that's surprising about the music business these days is it's less about the EP and less about the album, and really more about a track by track. Because if you think about the DSPs, YouTube, Spotify, Deezer, Pandora, Apple Music, all of those, their business is to get you to subscribe and have a product that's so compelling that it's sticky, that you come back and use it a lot. How do they do that? With great music broken up by genre and more so mood, beats per minute, whatever they do, but it all comes down to the song. So when I meet with DIY artists, the challenge that they have sometimes is they've recorded that music 18 months ago. And it's like a baby. They just want to get that thing out.
Yeah.
It's like, I've had enough. My ankles are swollen. I've had enough. Let's get this thing done. And you need to kind of pump the brakes a little bit and say, okay, let's take a look at your audience. Is there any demand for this? Let's create a marketing plan for this. Let's create, a timeline of how we're going to roll out all of these assets to reach this audience. It's not rocket surgery, as we joke around. It's really more about just getting everybody to fly in formation and to do real planning. There are all sorts of other things that some artists are really good at. Socials, some aren't. There are plenty of people who can do that. And if you're not an established artist and you don't have those budgets, you've got a street team. It may be your boyfriend or girlfriend. It may be your mom. It may be whoever, but everybody's kind of got that street team. And if you're not good at, say, Instagram, find one of your friends that is. You can't do everything.
Yeah. You and I have talked on the podcast about bass swapping, which is such a great line. Talk a little bit about how artists can kind of do that bass swapping, what it is and the concept. things like
Yeah,
that?
these days, especially in a COVID world, you're trying to, as a new developing artist, you're always trying to grow your base. And sometimes it's from 0 to 60. So how do you do that? There are a lot of tactics that we've found success in, and they're not tricks. They're not gimmicks. They're not gaming the system. It's really more about optimization, right? You may have heard of lookalike audiences. That's always been something that works really well, where you have a list of music fans, and let's say your music fans have certain attributes to them. So if you put that list into Facebook, Facebook will go out and find other people with that attribute that don't list you as one of their favorite artists. That can be really, really compelling, right? So base swapping, I've seen a lot more of this lately, where since it's just like when you have an opening band, that's base swapping.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you are in a band and you're opening for this other larger band, you're trying to grab some of their audience, right? And then the headliner, knowing that maybe you're younger and hipper, might want to try to pull in some of your people. That's base swapping. But how it relates to today is, let's say, like this morning, I watched this live stream. It had 4 bands on, and then one would play a song and everybody would clap. Then it would go to the other one and everybody would clap. But what was genius about that, besides the fact that it was fantastic, is that number one, you actually had some interaction other than chat, which was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
But there were people tuning in to see the accidentals that maybe weren't aware of the other artists, and vice versa. Well, now this larger audience comes and they gain fans. That's kind of base swapping a little bit.
Right.
And one other part of it is, if you have friends that are in a band, and we've done this many times, where you have another band that, you know, maybe with a similar audience, you know, put them in your email blast that goes out, hey, this is what we're listening to. And then they reciprocate, or you do a takeover on one of their socials. That's base swapping.
And then once you lay out these marketing plans, and I want to swing back after you answer this question. Remind me, I also want to cover sort of release strategies these days. But you know, Jim Griffin actually had a great line here. It's the product to service transition. That's a very elegant way of saying that. So as you are, so you're putting all these things in place. What sort of metrics are you then monitoring to gauge the effectiveness of all of these? I mean, the good news is there's a lot more metrics to follow, but
Yeah.
the bad news is there's a lot more metrics to follow. And so, you know, what are you doing in, you know, as a representative of these artists, and what can artists be doing to kind of,
Yeah, we're trying to get people away from the big generic numbers like likes and follows. Followers is important. You know, it's important for, you know, Spotify. You want followers because when you release new music, it's dropped into their Discover Weekly, Release Radar, radio, those kinds of things. So playlists, less important for follow. It's kind of an ego number. The numbers that we look at are engagement and real engagement. So let's say you have an increase in audience. I want to see what the engagement is. Are people watching the video? If they are, how far are they getting through the video? You know, are they watching the whole thing? Are they commenting on it? Are they forwarding it to friends? If it's on a DSP like Spotify, are they, you know, what's the source of that stream, right? What's the save rate? Are people dragging it into their personal library?
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are some metrics that are really, really key, because it sounds pedantic and we say this a lot, but you want to really just look at what's working and do more of that, and what's not working and do less than that. And it's less of that. It's different for every release. It's different for every artist, but that's the fun part, is looking under the hood and looking for that data to find something that you can act on.
Right. By the way, Jim modified that elegant statement to, he also calls it Tarzan economics.
Jim, you're the best, man.
Economics major, I find that quite hysterical. But he also brought up a good question a little bit above that, is what is the data that artists should be getting that they don't?
Well, there's so much of it that's free that they don't sign up for. For example, Spotify for artists, Apple Music for artists, Amazon Music for artists. Those are three
Mhm.
things that you should go in, claim your page. That's your data. You can tell so much about, who's streaming your music, where they are, what device they're on, how it compares to other people, what that source is. Are they listening to it on a playlist? Are they pulling it from their own library? And if it's from a playlist, what playlist is it from? And you can get so much information and knowledge from just those three platforms that are free for any
Right.
artist. The other side of that is make sure you sign up for your social insights, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, etc. And then I think the next level, and this is typically more on the management side, although I do know some artists that are into this, are the data platforms. The obvious one is Nielsen Connect, the artist formerly known as SoundScan,
Yep,
POS data. It really gives you what's going on as a really great point of reference.
Yeah.
But then there are all these great platforms like Chartmetric, where, with Chartmetric, I can go in and see what playlist was I added to, which ones was I taken off of, what number am I in, the number 5 slot, or am I in the number 50 of 50 songs? How many, not followers, how many monthly listeners do I have on these playlists? Because that's kind of the metric you want to take a look
Right.
at. So Chartmetric has some beautiful analytics to help artists, managers, labels, distribution companies. There's a new company out of Slovenia called Vibrate that just launched,
Yeah.
and they have some amazing insights, but they also have a whole section on engagement. And I always warn clients, because they'll come to me and they'll say, well, I can buy 100,000 Instagram followers, or I can buy, there's this thing where somebody's offering me this.
Mm.
And there's so much danger involved in that, because I've seen artists get pulled off of Spotify.
Yep.
Just the first week of May, I went through and looked at like 25 of our artists, and we had very minor dips, but there was one artist that lost like 30,000 followers that week on Spotify, because they did a little cleansing, and they're not stupid. They look for things like spin farms and bots and all sorts of people trying to game the system. So yeah, that's the kind of data I look for on those things. Or, well, let me back up. It's really more about what can they find. They can find all that data that I mentioned, a lot of it for free.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can also compare it to other artists, which I encourage people to do. You kind of know what artists are in your level, or kind of at your level, or who you would tour with, who you would play a show with, and maybe who had been out about the same amount of time, has maybe about the same base. And you can kind of see areas where they're overperforming and learn a lot that way too.
Interesting. I do want to actually, I was going to bring this up. Dan Conley has asked this. With live shows being non-existent at the moment, has sync placement and licensing risen in importance as a revenue stream? And I kind of think back to my days when I was at Warner Brothers Records. They were the Warner Special Products guys and the sync licensing guys weren't even in the same building. And it was like, oh yeah, they're over there. What do? They do TV stuff. Oh, okay. Oh my God, it is so crucial now. And it kind of, what do you, are you involved in that in different capacities with different artists? And how competitive is that these days?
Well, it's super
everybody
competitive.
Wants to
it is, but there's two things we have to think about with sync. Sync licensing is when you put, your music is placed in film, TV, shows, commercials, games, all sorts of things. But there's less production right now, given the pandemic. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Yes, more people are focusing on it, so the importance is as high as it's ever been, but there may not be the same amount of opportunities. So we were talking to a couple of our sync placement friends, and they have kind of their own stable that they pursue first, right? And so if you have a distribution company, they typically have a sync person in-house that will work your music to music supervisors. But sync, is so important and can make or break a track. I remember years ago, it was like uncool, to be in commercials.
Totally.
Neil Young used to sing about it, right?
Yeah.
And then it started getting to be a big deal. And before there was Apple Music, there was iTunes, and they would put a song in one of their commercials and it would make the career. It was that powerful.
Yeah.
And even to this day, the right placement, you know, in a movie, TV show, games, especially these days, and it may not be technically sync, but looking at things like, you know, TikTok and Roblox, there's so many different opportunities out there. So yes, it's super important. You have to pursue it, but it's also really challenging right now.
Yeah. You mentioned Cameo a little bit about Susan Schwartz. I can't quite get that out. She mentioned she was speaking with an agent the other day who has said all of her clients are loving Cameo now since it pays their bills, something they wouldn't have touched pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So you know, speaking of COVID, Tim Healy asking, you know, how effective are live stream performances versus individual music video song releases these days? And it's certainly changed in COVID.
How you doing, Tim? Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think it's an either or. We all know that live streams can be compelling. They can be pretty cool, but there's nothing that's going to beat that feeling when you're at a show, the lights go down, the adrenaline's pumping, you know, there's an electricity in the crowd, and it's, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. I mean, you just get goosebumps, right?
Yeah.
You're not probably going to get that. But that isn't to say there aren't super compelling live streams out there.
Right.
I've seen some really amazing ones. I saw one the other day where instead of facing the computer, the band did it in the round, and the camera just kind of moved around, and they were kind of facing each other, and people are getting really creative with that. Plus there's that interactive thing. I've been on so many of these live streams where I've said, oh, you know, I love that song. And they'll say, oh, hey, Jay, you know, we're going to play this one for you, you know, that sort of thing. You know, that's kind of cool. So there's some great things about live streaming. And I'm hoping that a lot of these new tools that these artists are picking up, that they'll continue to, you know, have that arrow in their quiver as they move on past that, right? So, which brings us, Tim, to your other part of that with video. It's not either or, it's both. You can make revenue from live streams. You know, Stage, it's been around forever, but even some of these other platforms, Twitch, there's a lot of these great platforms, and I've had artists make more money from a tip jar than they did from ticket sales. So moving over to videos, you know, if you talk to folks that are really, really good at marketing with YouTube, they'll tell you that you don't just drop a video into this, you know, garage called YouTube and forget about it. We could talk for hours about strategy behind it, but the bottom line is people have been doing these really cool things like, you know, maybe 8 weeks out, they drop the pseudo video, you know, which is just the album art
video.
and the song, the audio bed, right? Then the next week, maybe it's, you know, a teaser video, maybe it's a, you know, a lyric video, kind of a stripped down, reimagined version as you get up. And maybe you have a concept video, maybe you don't. A concept video meaning kind of like the old quote unquote MTV era video. So there's strategies surrounding your release cadence on videos. And again, not to game the system, but just to grow the audience. You want to be on a regular cadence. We post every Thursday at 2 p.m. People know that you're doing that. But then you also do live streaming. You also do socials. And the thing that's not sexy about some of this stuff is email. It still works.
It's so 90s, Jay.
I know.
All right. Jordan Berliot, I think, echoing that.
Jordan.
It's a big deal because no artist other than a superstar pop or hip hop act can survive financially on streaming revenue. But then Jim Griffith, of course, brings up an interesting question. What rights need clearance for a live stream? I don't actually know the answer to
that. Here's the question. And look, yes, there are rights that need to be cleared. And there's been a lot of articles going back and forth because a lot of artists aren't getting the rights, especially when it's a public performance of somebody else's work. And there's been a lot of reporting this last week about, you know, Facebook. You and I talked about it on the podcast. You know, I think, yes, there are rights that need to be acquired. But I think since this is a wild, wild west and we're so new into the space, I'm not sure that message is getting out to everybody what those rights are and what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it's better in some people's minds to ask for permission or for forgiveness than permission.
We do that a lot of the music business,
Yes,
Jay.
we do. Yeah, we do.
Susan Schwartz echoing gray area. Danger, Will Robinson. Definite performance license. Well, let's kind of leave the here and now for a second.
Okay.
And let's kind of get into our time machine and step forward, let's say the next 12 to 18 months. And I know crystal balls get really hazy the further out you go forward. But what changes do you see maybe in that time frame? Is it going to be pretty much the same, or are there going to be some things coming in that are just coming in now? They're going to be more prevalent then? What do you see in your crystal ball?
Well,
Jay?
it's always changing and evolving. You and I know that. It's every month or two, there's some new platform, there's some new angle. And with marketing tactics, there are things that work now that maybe didn't work 18 months ago and maybe won't work 18 months from now.
Mm-hmm.
A prime example is we're having pretty decent success using these Instagram stories ads driving to Spotify, these little 15-second ads. I don't know how long that's going to last, but right now for artists with very little bass, that tends to be working well.
Mm-hmm.
Same with bass swapping that we talked about, going
Yeah.
from 0 to 60. That seems to be doing well. I think going forward, as we hopefully come out of this pandemic,
Yes.
I don't think that on a Thursday it's going to be, okay, we're done. Everybody
That's
back in.
right.
We're going to do some shows here, some socially distanced things here. I think it's going to be a lot longer for a full-on tour than maybe a lot of people think.
Oh,
So how can artists survive? How can labels survive between, now and that time where we get back to that more of a regular ecosystem? I will say that regular ecosystem will include some of these tactics that we're learning now.
Mm-hmm.
It will be live streaming. It will be some of these audience growth tactics that maybe we weren't able to do. I'm confident it'll surround experiences a lot more than it has. So my crystal ball, and I'm not saying that I'm good at this, but I would say that you're going to see more data platforms. They're going to get more nuanced. They're going to get better at what they do and help you to provide you with the data to really do what you want to do, whether that's grow your audience, grow your sales streams, downloads, butts in the seats, whatever. I think that's going to happen. I really enjoy trying out new tools and tactics.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they're just kind of a rehash of somebody else's, but every now and then something comes along that's really cool that you can use, or things evolve. Tone Den is a good example. I was using Tone Den, 4 or 5 years ago, and it was really more about lookalike audiences and retargeting. Now it's really about these cool little, playbooks to, you have a goal, which is I want more YouTube subscribers. So here's the playbook. Here's what you need to do to do that. And it helps automate the process a little bit.
Yeah.
Same with the Spotify growth and things like that. So I know I kind of dodged the question a little bit because I really don't know, how things are going. I just know that we're going to be doing more live streaming. We're going to get better at live streaming, not just in the video, but in the audio, the content. And we're going to be more creative about that. So it's not just that Brady Bunch looking screen in Zoom,
Right.
Yeah.
And then again, let's use that time frame, 12 to 18 months. In terms of the business landscape, do you see any dramatic changes in who these the DSPs are? With Spotify, with Apple Music, with any of these folks, will that landscape look a little different, do you think?
There's a lot of schools of thought on that, Michael. I think that I've always felt that the DSPs, where music isn't their core business, will probably be around a while, and I'm talking about Apple, Amazon,
Sure.
Google, those guys. I think they could survive with or without music. I'm not really concerned about that. Where I've seen either consolidation or I've seen evolution are these companies where music is just their core business. The Spotify's of the world, Pandora, Deezer. And I watch them closely because they're working really hard to innovate. They're doing some really great things with and Amazon Music, with their smart speakers and with, there was a big meeting this morning that I attended for indies on Amazon online, and they are working really hard to engage and grow their audience and their subscribers. So I see, Amazon with all the smart speaker technology and all of the innovations that they're doing. And then I kind of see all the innovations that Spotify's doing, with their songwriter pages and Release Radar, Discover Weekly, all those kind of personalized or algorithmically created playlists. And then being able to share data with you on the back end that can help you. I think they're doing some really, really great things. But also I deal a lot with Pandora because it's, a lot of us are hardcore music fans. So we want to drive the ship. We want to control our playlists and share and talk, but not everybody's a freak like us. There are folks who, they just want great music. They want to say, look, I like Neil Finn. Can you play some more music like Neil Finn?
Yeah.
I'm a happy camper, right? And they've got millions of viewers, and they do a thing that I think is fairly innovative. And that is these Pandora stories, where it's a track by track interview. Yeah. So it's like audio track. This is how I wrote this song. This is what it meant to me. Then they play the song. And it's one of those really compelling, deep experiences that I'm really surprised isn't a bigger part of digital service providers. Yes, they're getting into podcasts, and you and I do a podcast. We love podcasts. And anything that makes that easier is great. But I think we also, as an industry, to Jim's point earlier, we need to make it easier for people to put music in podcasts, to put music in their live streams, to music in their videos, things like that. We need to lower that barrier to entry and make it as simple as possible for everybody.
I'm going to jump over to the chat stuff. It's going up and down real fast. But
I know I can't talk and read it at the same time.
Like, I'm like plates, chainsaw. Jim started a conversation asking if anybody had seen that Barack Obama yesterday asked people to text him. And then he mentioned that it was an impressive response. And then TJ Miller said, well, what are your thoughts on SMS text campaigns? That kind of goes back to, email. Are text campaigns still a thing, an effective
thing? My gosh, yes. Yes, okay. They are. There are companies that are based on that. And I'll drop a couple of them and not to single any others out, but let's say you want to reach everybody in your Facebook followers. Well, you can't really message all of them. You could do maybe one at a time. You could boost a post. There are some tactics you can use, but then there are these platforms like Botletter and Mcast, where you can send a message to your Facebook followers and ask them to opt in and say, hey, would you like to receive a monthly message from me, or offers, tour schedules, whatever. And once you get that back, now you've got direct access to your fans, which is like that email list that we talked about. That's so important to have, to control that, right? Because the average open rate roughly in the music industry is like 16, 17%. If you get that on one of your emails, you're doing pretty well. Right. Click through, a lot less, maybe 3%. But when you lock into one of these like Botletter campaigns, I've seen campaigns that were 75%, 80% open rate, because now it's really, you're surgical, right? You're hitting those things. So to answer your question, all of the above. Use your socials as a platform to communicate with your fans. But the last thing I'll say on it is, don't just shout, buy my album, see my show, buy my album, see my show. You have to have a relationship and an engagement, and these platforms reward that. So if Parthenon Huxley posts, one of his performances, and I jot down, hey, that was a cool performance, then he responds to me. And then I respond, next thing you know, it's being shared to more and more people
Yeah.
because the algorithm sees that it's getting more engagement and more people are involved, and then it blossoms. So you don't bark orders at people. Try to engage them and have a relationship with them. I was joking with a friend the other day that if you look at some of Alice Cooper's socials, it's more about haunted houses and crazy cars.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what his fans engage with. It can't be every time, I've got this new album. Hey, have you picked up my box set? Hey, have you done this? Because, you know, we don't want to be sold to all the time.
Yeah, Jordan Burleon has actually a good question. It says, the data won't help artists until Spotify, Apple, and YouTube reinstate reporting streams on a market-by-market basis.
Yeah.
Is that going to happen? Is that
Jordan is absolutely right. I don't know if it's going to happen, but one of my big things is what he just mentioned, and also just to piggyback on that, when you're in Apple Music for Artists, since Apple owns Shazam, you can get some Shazam data,
Mm-hmm.
but not at the granular level. Like
Right.
I want to know.
No.
There were 150 people who Shazammed this yesterday in Milwaukee. Where was it? In the airport? Was it on the
Right.
radio? Was it in a train station?
Yeah.
You know, I would love, because that's where you can really use that data. But Jordan's actually, I mean, he's right. These things are a nice step forward,
Mm-hmm.
but they're in their infancy. I think that Spotify is a little bit ahead of everybody else because you can go in there and change the bio, you can change the social links, you can change the images, the artist pick, you know, a charitable kind of artist pick. There's so many, the banner, there's so many things you can do to customize Spotify that you really can't do on some of the other platforms like Apple Music. I think right now today you can really only change your artist image, which is the avatar. And Amazon is just now rolling out today, I think, to make it so you can change your image. But I think at some point, maybe a tie-in with, you know, Jaxta or some cool kind of metadata company where you can get sidemen listed on there. I would love to be able to go into a digital service provider and go, you know, here's a producer that I like, you know, I'd like to see everything they've done. You know, here's a guitar player I like. What other stuff are they on? Here's a songwriter. And yeah, there's a few of these. But those are the kind of things we can do in this new ecosystem that we've never been able to do before. But we're not
want
quite
more.
there yet. Yeah. And again, the last thing I'll say on that is that metadata is one of those things that keeps me up at night because each distributor has a different number of fields that they deliver to the digital service providers. Some of them have room for everything, sidemen, all of that. Some of them don't. As an industry, we just really need to get our act together.
Right. Dan Conley was asking, what are you thinking about TikTok now? Are you looking for an for alternatives to replace it?
Wow. I mean, everybody, you know how it is in the music industry. If something's successful,
Yes.
you know, you're going to have a lot more of them.
That's right.
If Billie Eilish is successful, you're going to get a lot more people like Billie Eilish. I actually like TikTok. You know, there's a common misconception that it's just for young kids.
Mm-hmm.
Every 2 weeks I do this management call, Zoom, and we had somebody on talking about TikTok for adults. And there are a lot of adults on there, and you can grow your audience fairly quickly, you know, with some really compelling 15-second videos. I'm a big believer in you go to where the audience is. And if the audience is on TikTok, and of course now all of the competitors are coming up with their version of TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's something really oddly compelling about flipping through TikTok and seeing how people use music, whether it's for dancing, whether they use it for their, you know, instructional videos. And there are some folks that I follow on there that are really compelling. I think where it gets a little dicey for me is there are these TikTok influencers, and you can spend a lot of money. I had a client drop $50,000 last week on one influencer against my better judgment. But there are these platforms like, you know, we mentioned Chartmetric. You can track TikTok in there, which is kind of cool. But like I said, you can grow your audience fairly quickly there. I believe it's all of the above. I think if you're a musician, singer-songwriter, artist manager, I think you need to be on those platforms. I think you need to look at some of the gaming platforms and see how people are
Mm,
interacting with music there
yeah,
as well.
sure. Yeah. Um, this name always throws me because it can be a few different pronunciations. I'm going to go with Andrea, could be Andrea or whatever. Andrea Stray, she's saying, I think it's really important that artists make their live streams as professional as they can. Good sound and cameras are a must. The 5 Spot in Nashville allows bands to perform on stage with cameras and great sound. It makes it worth coming back to. And I've noticed that. That's an easy thing to kind of blow off when you're an artist, but
Uh-huh.
oh boy, once you've seen good, you don't want to see bad.
No, and I have some good advice for everybody. One of my clients, Savannah Beist from the Accidentals, put together this massive document on live streaming, all the different platforms, all of, the different equipment you can use, what
Oh
some of the
yes. Mhm.
pitfalls are,
Easy for you to say.
all of that. And
Yeah.
that's a free document. I know it's on a lot of different platforms like Hypebot. I know the Grammy.com. It's also available there. Tom, I can send it to you, and if anybody wants to get it, it's such a great document. It's a Google Doc, so we'll send the link, and it's a living, breathing thing. But you're absolutely right. You only have one chance to make a first impression, right? And
That's
even if it's a
right.
hardcore fan, I've seen some live streams that sounded phenomenal. The one
Yeah.
I listened to this morning, it sounded like they were in the studio.
Yeah.
But then there's some of them that, you're handicapped by your bandwidth,
Sure.
but there are some things you can control,
Mhm.
like how you look, how the room looks,
Yeah.
are you close enough to the camera, some
Sure.
of those kinds of things. And sound does matter.
Yeah. Well, we're kind of getting near the end of our time here. Any thoughts to kind of wrap this up? We were chuckling on our podcast about the 6 Ps. Proper planning prevents piss poor performance. What are what are some advices to folks that are on the chat? And by the way, thanks for everyone on the chat. It's been super active, and I'm sorry I couldn't quite catch up with everybody. Um, you know, uh,
Honored.
for managers and label folks, some words of wisdom, and for artists, words of wisdom as we move forward.
Well, like I noticed Jordan Burliant was on here, and I have a great deal of respect for Jordan, and he manages artists and has for many years. And I think if you were to talk to Jordan and his team about being successful at management, you don't just accidentally, things just don't happen. You make things happen, but more importantly, you plan. You have to have a plan. We always say a playlist is not a marketing plan. I've got this like 90-day checklist that I sit down with people, and it's not sexy. It's not, a lot of fun sometimes, but you need to create a plan. You need to create a marketing plan, and you have to surround yourself with a team of evangelists.
Mm,
Man, you do that and amazing things happen. I've
yeah.
seen it happen. If you get a publicist that is just on fire for you, a sync licensing person, a manager, a music marketer like Label Logic, or whoever it is, whoever your team is, you want them to be excited about you. And the other part of that coin is, what's the narrative? And I say this every day. What is the narrative? So let's take it for the artist. Why should anybody care
Mhm.
about you as an artist? If you had 30 seconds in an elevator with a TV booker or, potential manager or whatever, what would you tell them about you as an artist? And it's got to be compelling. And the same
Yeah.
thing about your releases. It's gotten to the point now that when you use Spotify's submission tool, you have to plug in a narrative, right? And that is like, for that song, what makes that song special? Why should anybody care? Is it aspirational? Is it the song you've always wanted to meet? Did you overcome adversity? You know, but we're human beings. We love the story. We crave that narrative. And so I think words of advice, things that I give to clients all the time is, it's all about planning. It's all about surrounding yourself with, people that want it as badly or worse than you do,
Mhm.
and having that compelling narrative. But having said all of that, none of that means anything unless you have great music. So I'm just assuming, first
Yeah.
off, that you're writing compelling, original music with integrity.
And we're going to leave it with Jim Griffin as the latest, with a great line. Jay is the Dr. Fauci of infecting fans with info. Write that down. Tattoo that on yourself, Jay. That
Jim, thank you. Thank you so much. Kristen Jewell, love you.
Yeah,
Good to see you in the chat.
Thanks to everybody that was chatting and helping us. We really appreciate it. And Tom, thank you for including me in this. And Jay, thank you for letting me a part of it. I can listen to Jay all the time, as I
You often do.
And it never gets old.
And
So,
Tom, you know, Michael and I were talking about this. We've seen some of your other shows, and you know, I saw the Cameo Carlson one was absolutely amazing. I encourage people to go check out kind of the backlog of these shows. There's some really, really interesting conversations there. And thanks so much for including me in this.
Oh yeah, totally. We appreciate it, Tom.
Well, thank you to you guys. Really, you're the rock stars of this program. And
That guy is right there.
I put a note up there earlier on the chat, like, I can't believe this stuff is free. The knowledge transfer that, Jay, you are imparting today is worth a lot of money. So we appreciate you sharing some of your wisdom for free. I've encouraged all of our listeners to check out your podcasts. I hope that they will do it. Hopefully you picked up some new disciples today. And folks, I want to conclude by saying that we're going to do this again on next Tuesday. And I'm tickled pink to present an old friend of the music industry, Mr. Ian Rogers, that's a name that a lot of you may have known back in the day. Ian left the industry and works in Paris for Louis Vuitton. And Peggy Dold is going to be interviewing Ian Rogers here next week. So check that out. And then next Thursday, we've got Professor Scott Galloway gracing this program, which is another big get for us. So we're very happy. Dick Huey's going to be interviewing him. So thank you for your attention and your support of this program. I want to encourage everyone to be nice to each other, but vote on November 3rd, whatever you do. It's very important. I don't care who you vote for, just vote. With that, folks, signing off. See you soon.
Thanks again.